All right, welcome on, everyone. We're gonna get started with the show momentarily. Are you're exercising your face already for the thumbnails? Just got
Yeah. Well, I'm not.
kind of kind of got a little warmed up here. Well,
Gotta give the people what they want, if that is somehow what they want.
okay. Your thoughts on at least in terms of your facial expression on the matchup tomorrow night?
Let's see. Your thoughts on there being 0 NBA games on Wednesday? I hadn't realized there were no games on Wednesday until somewhat recently.
Yeah, so why is that? Is there football or something? I don't
No, it's
understand
no,
why
it's
they.
because they didn't know who was going to be in the cup final, so they didn't schedule any other games.
Yeah, that would be hilarious if they actually yeah, that would be absolutely hilarious if some poor team plays in that, loses, and then you gotta fly to back to Toronto for a back to back.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They
okay,
should have just
that's a
had
good point.
like the Wizards and the like a few of the all the teams that had never won a cup game before this year.
Okay. Well, I like that they've really like kind of jiggered with the schedule here.
Yeah.
Okay, that's probably enough facial expressions. So we're gonna do a 1560 mailbag, and we're gonna start that. Oh, first I'll have to make sure I'm actually recording. That would be good. Let's try that. Okay. Welcome on to a West 15 in 60 mailbag edition. Might end up being more like 8 in 60. We'll see how much we can get through here on this Monday night, late on. In contrast to what we did in the East Day, let's start at the bottom of the alphabet here, and that brings us to the Utah Jazz. A rather sparse number of questions for them, but we'll make up for it on the Spurs. It looks like.
Yeah, I think we will. So the Utah Jazz are 5-19 on the season. That number does not include the absolute demolition that is currently going on at the hands of the LA Clippers. That game is not yet final. James Harden had like 34 at halftime. The Jazz, so that's 1-17. Well, sorry, 1-7, not 1-17 though. It feels like that since the last 15 and 60. They are 27th, including the glass net rating, 22nd in offense, 29th in defense, which I think is disappointing relative to everything, even if their talent isn't perfect. ESPN's
Well, they
BPI.
can't get back on defense for the second straight year. Their transition defense is really awful, and yeah, so that's definitely a concern.
And then their ESPN's BPI has them winning 23 games, which would be last in the Western Conference and gives them a 0% chance of making the playoffs. And we got a
They
series.
quickly though. They seem like so garden variety bad, right? Like
Well,
compared to
you say
the
that
Wizards.
before that Clippers game where they're just getting demolished. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean they've had it, but whatever. Like
they're not
negative
Wizards
nine
bad.
point two net rating. Like yeah, it's just like okay, this is like a worst team in a conference type of team.
Yeah.
That's about what we expected, but yeah, okay. Let's
So
start with this one that you're
we
gonna
got
get
it. We
to.
got a series of different questions that relate to the Jazz veterans and trade value. For some reason, that is of mind for people who think about the Jazz. And so, what I wanted to do, it's not Ryan, it's Rin asked, is there any trade value for John Collins, Colin Sexton, and Jordan Clarkson? And generally, the way that I like to walk people through this is, well, what is their contract like after this year? Because that is often what these teams are considering. John Collins has a player option for 26.6 million for.
You know what, Danny? This is like the first one of these that I'm actually like surprised it's almost over this quickly. I'm always usually these long 5-year deals that are bad contracts. It's like they just seem to go on forever. I'm actually whoa, hey, we're at that player option already. All
Yeah.
right.
And then Colin Sexton, 1 year remaining after this year, 19.2 million. And then Jordan Clarkson, 1 year remaining, 14.3 million. And so in my eyes, going back to Amin El Hassan and I coined the Nene test those many years ago. I think John Collins fails it personally. I don't think a player who isn't a clear-cut starter, even 26 million isn't what it used to be. I personally don't think that because he's not a starting caliber player for me right now. And so, but he is a classic example of somebody who it only takes one or two. And so I don't think he'll have positive value, but I also think that there will be teams that are interested.
Yeah, another way that I've begun to frame it with guys having positive trade value is not only like, okay, is he quote unquote worth his contract? Right, like Kyle Kuzma is quote unquote worth his contract if he gets back to the levels that he's been at. But the greater question is, what team is bringing this guy in to be a starter that actually is trying to win and is doing this deal for something other than financial reasons, right? Like maybe John Collins, let's say like
I mean, the power forward neediest team might be the Philadelphia 76ers.
Yeah, but he wouldn't be terrible there, right? But then you run into the problem of them not really having matching salary for him. But that's one where, but he probably wouldn't be closing for them, right? Maybe he would start just because they want to get a little more size, make it easier on Embiid. But yeah, overall though, like a team that's really trying to win, and then you also are like, well, not only is it who's bringing him in to start, but who is bringing him in to start for whom he's the best option that they couldn't get someone better for a first round pick, right? Like the Jazz, I mean, they got to get to the salary floor somehow. Like John Collins seems like a decent vet. He at least like gets some points and rebounds. Like they already have accomplished their goal of being pathetically terrible. So like, you're going to move him for like a couple of seconds. And then what's the matching salary? Like a pure expiring? I mean, I guess, but that like maybe that sort of a deal would happen when he's in the final year of his deal. Maybe that's something that could happen. But I mean, I don't think like Sexton is probably the most interesting of these guys, but even you're not necessarily like, okay, are you giving up a first to get this guy? Like maybe an interesting analog would be someone who actually was on Sexton's forward team who was brought in, ironically enough, to replace Sexton the year that he tore his ACL, which was Karis LeVert when the Cavs were first good. And kind of, so like Colin Sexton is a different kind of player than LeVert was then a little bit, but LeVert didn't defend at that point. He was mostly known as a driver, streaky shooter. Like I think Sexton's a better offensive player now than LeVert was at that point.
I agree.
But so maybe it's like a low first to bring in Sexton, but like, are you really going to have him closing games on a playoff teams with how small he is? And he's improved as a passer, but he still is not, a starting point guard. He's really a shooting guard. And then Clarkson, you run into the same thing. Absolutely no way they're getting a first round value for Clarkson unless there's just taking on really bad money. And it doesn't seem like there are that many of these teams that really are going to be making financially focused moves. I think those happen in the summer. Maybe that's when, the Jazz trade Colin Sexton. They've got some flexibility and take back $30 million of money, and that's how they get to more value. But it just, I don't see first round value for any of these guys, and they're already as bad as they want to be. So why wouldn't you just hold on to them at this point? Because I mean, you can't play even more. Like Cody Williams just had to go to the G League because even on this team he couldn't like play regular minutes because he was so bad.
Yeah, and I think that connects well with with another question from the same person. It's not Rin, it's Rin. Which first and second year players in the Jazz have shown the most promise? And unfortunately, the answer isn't as robust as we'd like it to be. I mean, I still think it's Keontae George, but this has not been a fantastic Keontae George season. He's still under league average true shooting. He's shown some stuff. I think he's a better player this year offensively than he was last year, but it's not massive growth from him. And Isaiah Collier continues to intrigue me. I think that
can we say Isaiah Collier's stats here? We'll begin with the advanced stats, and I agree. I mean, he's someone that I have liked. 2.4 PER. I know we don't use PER that much, but that just shows you like how you're just basically like not putting up any box score stats, right? And 36% true shooting. He is 4 of 27 from 3 on the year.
And 42% on twos is a problem too for him.
He's 8 of 18 from the foul line. And, oh, by the way, Isaiah Collier is turning it over at a rate of 4.8 per 36 for a guy who's not really making that many plays. Like, that is a very atrocious rate. I mean, if you compare that, the percentage of plays that he either shoots or turns it over, his turnover rate is 32.8% of plays that he finishes with a shot or turnover or a free throw is a turnover.
Well, and
I don't recall ever, like, that might be the highest turnover rate for any player who's played 291 minutes in any season. That's how high that number is. I mean, maybe there's some big man who, like, never, like, you know, a Jason Collins sort of guy who just, like, his only entry in the box score would be sending a legal screen. But, like, Isaiah Collier's usage is not, like, tiny. It's 17%. I would bet you that never been a time.
This up right now.
I know, no, I that's why I'm saying the parameters. That there's never been a time in NBA history where a player has played 291 minutes, had a usage of 17.3 or greater, and a turnover rate of at least 32.8%.
Well, so Nate, I'll put it this way at the start of this, because this was the first search I did. There have only been 14 player seasons, even without the usage part of this, where a player has had a turnover percentage on Basketball Reference this high. Some of the luminaries in this, Ben Simmons, Fabricio Oberto.
But Earl Ben Watson. Simmons, was that like one of the years that he just, like, barely played, right? Like last year or something?
It's this year.
Oh. Okay, well, so that's one right there, actually. Well, so he does, I guess that's a question, but does Ben Simmons have the usage is 17%?
No, I haven't done the usage part of it yet.
Because the usage makes the overall denominator a lot bigger in terms of the number of plays. So you just have to be turning it over in raw terms way more to keep up with that usage and still turn it over 32.8% of the time.
So if you put in a requirement of a usage percentage of 17, he's the leader by a fair amount. This list
in NBA history.
In NBA history. I mean, granted, part of the argument is it's a partial sample, and so
I agree. But like, I mean, it just
okay. You want some luminaries? I'll give you a couple.
Oh my god. Okay.
Yinka Dare.
Oh my god, Yinka Dare was the guy. Like, he has, like, the worst turnover to assist to turnover ratio in, like, NBA. He, like, would have these seasons with, like, 0 or 1 assist. Okay, go ahead.
In this season, he had 0 assists. That was 95-96. John Crotty, Killian Hayes in 2020/21. Baron Davis on the Knicks. Let's see.
And then he, like, tore. I think he tore his. That was maybe in the playoffs. He tore his ACL. That was, like, a very limited season for him.
Somehow Steve Nash on the Suns in 11-12.
Had a turnover rate of 32.8%.
Oh no, 27. We're 32 is like there are only a couple of guys over 30 all time. We're talking we're in the high 20s.
Still very surprisingly high for Nash, but he also had a ton of assists.
He was,
See, that's the thing.
Was 37.
That's the other thing for that's the thing for Nash. Like, if we had our passing creation metric going back then, and you compared the number of turnovers, like, he wasn't shooting as much back then. He'd become more of a distributor in his old age. But that doesn't capture that.
Yeah. Oh, and Billy Donovan is on this list at 26.2.
Wow, that is truly insane. Like, what? When Bryce Sensabaugh actually has been pretty efficient this year, other than turning it over a ton himself and not playing any defense. Okay. So, which first and second year player in the Jazz is still the most promised? I mean, it's got to be number one, Keontae George, and everyone else just way, way behind him. I mean, it would probably, honestly, of all those guys, I still like Taylor Hendricks the best, even though he's been out the whole year.
Yeah. Sometimes zero data is better than the data you have.
All right, let's get to these 800 billion Spurs questions now. 13-13, 4-5 since we last checked in on them. They're fortunes have waxed and waned with the availability of Victor Wembanyama and this back issue. Net rating is negative 2.9. That's 20th. They are 19th on offense, which is way better than I expected that they would be. And 18th on defense. Again, they're rather stark numbers with Wembanyama on and off the floor. I would imagine maybe we'll check in on that during this. But they still project for the 12 seed, but that's a robust 38-44.
Mm-hmm.
And their playoff odds are 8%. Where do you want to start here?
I think this just went from Austin Campbell. If you were running the Spurs with the goal of winning a championship with Wembanyama over the next 10 years, what would you do differently than what the Spurs are currently doing or you expect them to do? And for me, they're honestly, whether Wembanyama becomes an offensive force or not, the goal, and this isn't the goal for the next 6 months, it's the goal for the next, I would say, probably 2 years, is to get the best possible offensive playmaker that you can get that ideally aligns closer with him age-wise. And that's the thing that I had an issue with to an extent with their draft, though there weren't good guys available this year and everything else, is that to me, that's what you're prioritizing with your cap space. Now, you probably throw everything you have into one decision with that, one evaluation, whoever that player ends up being. But the Spurs, to me, I don't, when you see who they draft and who they bring in, I mean, obviously Chris Paul is an exception to this. It doesn't feel like that's what they're doing. Cause like you could think about, trading the rights functionally to Rob Dillingham as like, okay, he was a bite at the apple. He might not have been the best bite at the apple. And so for me, the best teams have to have a great defensive player, but they also have to have a great offensive player. Ideally, that's a different human being. And so that's the A1 priority.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And they have gone after really athletic guys that they can teach how to shoot. So in theory, Sohan, Stephon Castle. And I just generally think if it's, obviously you're just looking for a perimeter superstar of some kind. And there aren't any available trade candidates that I would have pulled the trigger on yet.
Same.
For them. Like I think the general idea of the slow build is a good one. And their big problem is they just don't have anyone who can shoot right now. If you look at some of these offensive on-offs, where Julian Champagnie, they're 114 with him on the floor and 103 with him off the floor, 10.4 per 100 better. What is the difference? Well, he's the only actual normal shooting guard that they play. Devin Vassell is, he's only played 271 minutes, so that's a smaller sample. He's still coming off the bench. And then the other one is Harrison Barnes, playing him, especially if you could actually play him at the 4 with normal shooting, because you're normally going to have either Castle or Sohan on the floor with them. But when you're playing Barnes and Champagnie, and Chris Paul at least will make an open one, now you have a functional NBA offense. When you're not doing that, it is certainly less the case. So ultimately, I think just getting the personnel to allow Victor Wembanyama to be a hub, dive to the basket a little bit more, and also get more space. Because part of the reason he turns it over so much is because he just doesn't have much space to work with. Part of it because he just needs to get better at not turning it over. What else should we do here?
From Sal Card, I'll do a full breakdown of him later on. But Sal asked, do you see a path for Stephon Castle to be a featured point guard for the Spurs? Are you still down on his three-point shot? Yes, I am still down on his three-point shot. He makes it sometimes, but overall in the year, 5.6 per 36, which is a lower rate than you'd like if somebody's going to have the ball in their hands, 27%. And he's doing okay from the free throw line, but I mean, Castle, the book on him at UConn was they were letting him shoot and he still wasn't shooting. And I haven't seen mechanically a ton of different changes. So he has a lot of time to improve. But and we got another question for Dope of if the shooting never comes around, and today in the NBA, you cannot run an NBA offense if you're not a viable shooter. It's just too hard unless you are supreme in the other ways that Stephon Castle, some of which he is good at, but not supreme enough.
I almost prefer him as a point guard than a shooting guard. I think he actually has more chance to succeed as a point guard than a shooting guard because he if he actually is good enough to have the ball, then his lack of shooting doesn't matter quite as much. And yeah, he's not going to be a guy who's going to bang
not on
a
a
three
really good team. Like to me, if you're going to do that, then he's a backup.
Well, but then also he's your point guard, then your defense is going to be an absolute monster. Like if he's your smallest guy,
sure.
So and all right, like he's not the athlete that someone like John Morant is or Russell Westbrook, but he could kind of be someone along that realm. And if he could get his jumper to even being like where say an Anthony Black is now, I think that could be enough. But like because I think the chance of him being a good enough, because point guards generally are not as good as shooters as shooting guards. So if he could get his jumper to being passable or taking a few off the dribble, and more importantly, being someone who I think he has a better chance of being a good enough passer and driver to play point guard than a good enough shooter to play shooting guard. Maybe he could play
That's
the
an
three.
Interesting point.
I don't love his chance of getting to either of those. Like there's certainly been some flashes. We'll see. Like in the Spurs have taught guys to shoot before. And like I don't think he's gonna be, maybe he'll get to the point where he's not totally hopeless, but obviously you want more than that for your championship level of starter around Victor Wembanyama.
Yeah, and to me, the other thing is I was talking about the biggest priority is a dynamic person who can run the offense, and Castle's probably not going to be that. I would love for him to be good enough, but I don't think.
Well, and then the problem is if it's not him, but maybe he settles into that kind of Anthony Black third guard sort of role.
Yeah,
a DeLon Wright kind of guy. That's more his stuff, but like somebody's got even more size.
And even though I didn't love the Castle pick, it's a lot different taking a guy that I think is a third guard at fourth in the 24 draft than it is in a lot of other drafts. I can answer this one pretty quickly from Books 31 said the Spurs picked up Malachi Brands option for next year, but now he's 13 bench. What are the odds he gets cut or traded? And the thing to remember when we're talking about like an option for a fourth year, or honestly for a third year, is that you're not picking up that option is not a commitment to play that player. It's a commitment to just to see what they have going. And for San Antonio, the opportunity cost of paying him $4 million or $5 million for next year is not that big. And so you play him if you want to play him, but it's not like that $5 million is going to totally ruin their books.
We got asked what explains the Spurs clutch performance. Is it defense? No, it's actually offense. Their defensive rating 111 is pretty average in the clutch when offensive ratings generally decline a little bit. They are third in the NBA in clutch net rating, 127.3, 16.2 net rating overall, and 68% true shooting in the clutch. So, and they also really smack the offensive glass too in the clutch with 31%. But Chris Paul teams have usually played pretty well in the clutch, and he'll try to ramp up his usage a little bit to a level that, as an older guy, he hasn't been able to sustain throughout the entire game. So you can convince me that they could punch a little above their weight in the clutch, but I mean they've played 35 clutch minutes. So. And they're 7 and 3
it would be very interesting. I know at least one of those games was against the Jazz. Might have been 2.
Yeah. And then to put it in a little bit better of perspective, by our numbers, this was actually before their most recent games. The last time that Seth ran this, they are 6 and 3. They've won only one clutch game more than expected. So they also have been entering the clutch in pretty good position. That's been a big part of it. So, but it's just mostly luck, especially in a 35-minute sample.
Yeah.
What else we got here?
Let's see.
Thoughts on Mitch Johnson, what he's done during Pop's absence. You're saying, Antonio, would you feel comfortable hiring him as Pop's successor? And certainly the raw performance has been solid. How much of that has just been that Victor Wembanyama is now making more three-pointers than he was earlier?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. There's still, I think Johnson is still at the point where he's executing Greg Popovich's vision. It's good to see that statement from Pop today that he's trying to work back with his rehabilitation to appear on the sideline again. We'll see whether he's actually able to do that at this point, or whether that's the best thing for him or the organization. I hope that does prove to be the case. But, for a guy who is the oldest coach in NBA history by 4 years to suffer this sort of a health issue is a concern. And particularly when it seems like they're still talking about months before he could get back. Maybe it would be something where he can come back just for the end of the year and kind of leave on his terms, that sort of thing as well. I mean, we obviously don't know the severity of this. No one's seen him in front of a camera. This is just a statement. He did have a little bit of pop humor in the statement, but back to Johnson, I think he's still kind of executing Pop's vision, the organization's vision. He's playing Sohan, he's playing Castle. Like, they didn't draft those guys to not play them.
Yeah.
I would like to see more of Harrison Barnes on the end of games and Champagnie than some of these other guys. I think their best unit is probably Paul, Champagnie, Vassell, Barnes, Wembanyama. Wonder how many minutes that unit has actually played. I've seen very little of it. Like, they usually have one of their non-shooters on the floor. Now that Sohan is back, in particular, but
do you want to give me those players again? I missed one. So
it's basically the guys who can shoot: Chris Paul and Wembanyama. So it's Champagnie, Barnes, Vassell. Probably not many because Vassell's only played 270 minutes on the season. But it's too early for me to say on Johnson. Like, it's good that he's at least made it a conversation, but you have to open up the process. Yeah. I think, yeah.
That group has 4 cleaning the glass possessions together, but they do have a plus 225 net rating in those 4 possessions.
Hey, got it.
They made a 3 every single time.
Is that true?
They have a 300 off a 300 points per play.
Oh, that's great. Okay. Well, I would like to see more of that at the end of games. I understand why they don't want to go for it throughout the.
And it's always, as you said, from terms of my thoughts on Mitch Johnson, it's always hard to evaluate an interim coach. It was the same thing with Luke Walton because it's not. They're an interim coach. It's not their playbook. It's not all their stuff. And so, I think he's done fine.
But you can at least get an idea of if he's not the guy.
Yeah, and I think they're playing hard on defense, and that's one of the most important things that a coach can do.
Yeah.
So, and when you have a largely young team, that's a good thing.
Yeah. So biggest factors beyond the Spurs turnaround in year 2 of the Wemby era. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is Chris Paul. A lot of it is Wembanyama starting to shoot better as well. For them to be 19th on offense, I consider that to be a massive accomplishment, considering the talent on this group. And so what are the components of that?
Well, and I think another one of these, and we brought this up a lot with the Pistons and a few others, is that they're giving a higher proportion of their minutes to more capable players. And so
that's it. Yeah, that's totally it.
When you take out some of the worst stuff in the rotation and you replace it with Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes, it's going to look a lot better. And the question really is, when you move beyond that, how does it look? Especially because the higher level players that were replacements are older and not a part of their long-term core. And so,
I mean, for example, didn't they just kick the ball all over the gym last year, and now they're even in turnover percentage? That's a big part of it. They're 22nd in 3-point percentage.
Well, and Nate, if memory serves, their turnover percentage, it's better than last year, but not markedly. But that's because the non-Chris Paul minutes have been such an aggressive disaster that it's hurting the overall numbers.
Well, and here's one more thing too. The last couple of years, they've been pretty unlucky on opponent 3-pointers. I guess that was really more 2 years ago.
Yeah, last year I think it was more neutral.
Yeah, but like you said, I mean, they're just Malachi Branham doesn't play anymore, right? So I mean, the only 2, Blake Wesley took some strides defensively, but he doesn't really play anymore. So Castle is, even if you don't like him that much as a backup point guard, he's been better than Wesley was. He's just more capable. He's more size, more capable, at least doing something off the dribble. He's probably a better shooter than Wesley. Charles Bassey's recent strong play. It's good to see him back relatively early from a torn ACL by today's standards. And do you think he should supplant Zach Collins this season as the primary backup 5? yeah, Zach Collins to me, I would say one of the more, because he had shown decent flashes. Like I still didn't love that contract. Part of the reason that it was given out for 17 million a year was it was shorter. But like he had actually shown some of the rim protection that he had flashed in Portland, but he just isn't a good defensive center. And there's thought that he might expand his shooting. Like that hasn't happened either. So yeah, why not give Bassey a shot? Like he's at least like kind of rugged, you know?
He is, and I think he's been better defensively this year than Collins, and Collins is not so much better than Bassey offensively. And I mean, Bassey's a little bit younger, and I think he has some team control. I'm trying to remember. Let me look. No, he doesn't.
Yeah, I think he like re-signed. He probably re-signed some like Yankee special kind of contract. Yeah, let's take a look at Charles Bassey's.
Yeah, he has nothing. He has nothing on the books
stats
after this year.
Yeah. So in limited minutes for Bassey. Yeah, I don't think he would be a restricted free agent anymore. But yeah, 40% contest percentage and 54% shooting allowed around the rim. Now, opponents do shoot a lot of shots at the rim. For him to contest, 38 per 100 possessions is a ton. But opponents don't shoot a great number. So yeah, like he's shown a little bit of something. I mean, again, it's really like, could Charles Bassey be like an okay backup center someday? Yeah, I think so. He's to me, again, it's shown more than Collins, but they're not going to give up on Collins at this early.
No, especially because Collins still has one more year fully guaranteed. So like, but I think it's worth giving him some minutes and seeing what he can do, everything like that.
Quick question here from Tobias, which I think is a pretty simple answer. How would you handle the situation that Sohan and Castle take up a lot of the same role and seem hard to play and develop both of them? I don't think either of them really needs to play more than 24 minutes a game. And like, it is kind of tough, right, to play them together. But I think 24 minutes a game is plenty to develop later in the season. If after they make trades or if they fall out of it, then that might change. But honestly, you just whichever of them looks better, then maybe that one starts to take on more of a role when you're at least trying to win. But the odds are that neither of them are going to be tentpole players, and the odds that both of them are relatively low because of some of the limitations that they have as offensive guys. So I think you just continue on, and if they really both look that good, you deal with it at that point. But I would try to avoid overlapping them, as Tobias alluded to there. Not a ton on the Kings here. They are 13-13, 5-4 in their last 9. They've had some pretty nice moments, and then they'll always kind of claw back some disappointments. They've actually been rather unlucky, though. 3.1 net rating. That's actually 12th. They're 7th on offense, and amazingly, Danny, 14th on defense. BPI still doesn't like them. Yeah, go ahead.
No, that's fine.
Oh, BPI still likes them for only the 11th seed at 39 wins, 17% chance of making the playoffs. That seems pretty low to me.
Yeah, and I think that's a natural lead into this question from Arl. Despite currently being 12th in the West, how do you like?
I think that's Ari.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I can.
Arl is that's like a good. What is that, like a Norwegian name or so? A Viking name? Arl. Okay,
yeah.
Sorry, Ari. It's Ari.
Yeah, it is. I increased the font size on our document. Despite currently being 12th in the West, how do you like the Kings' chances to climb into the play-in, play-off picture? Seems like many have written them off, but still believe in the foundation can carry them at least the play-in. I think that saying they're not going to make the play-in is definitely bold, but the fundamental challenge is that the West is really strong. And so when you look at, okay, who's above them and how confident are we that those teams are going to stick? So OKC, Memphis, Dallas, Denver, Houston is above some of those teams, but I'll say like those 4 teams, if their key players stay healthy, they're pretty solid in. Then Minnesota has struggled relative to expectations so far, but they're still a fundamentally good team. Houston is playing really well, but they're still I believe in their defense at bare minimum. So that's 6, and that doesn't include the Suns, who have had a lot of injuries. So then you're talking about the play-in, and could they be better than the Clippers or the Warriors since they've been so short-handed, or the Lakers? Sure. And I'm skeptical of the Spurs. So I think that writing the Kings off from the play-in is short-sighted, though the idea that they're going to push beyond the play-in in terms of record seems very unlikely.
I mean, it's number one. Can we just discuss how it's absolutely deranged that there are 12 teams 500 or over in the West?
It's completely nuts.
Yeah, and that there are the 5 through 12 seeds all have either 13 or 14 wins right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, the Kings win 5 straight, and they're looking really good. They've been hurt by the fact that the Clippers have been better than expected. We'll see how much of a contribution Kawhi is able to make. I do think if Kawhi does come back and just even gives them like kind of very low end all-star production, like the Clippers probably are better than the Kings. I think the Kings, Lakers, Clippers, Warriors, maybe Suns, like there's I think actually things may end up ending up in similar tranche to the way they were last year, except the problem for all those teams is that the Rockets and the Grizz are really good now in a way that they weren't before.
And well, it's funny that I thought the Rockets were going to be a team burned by this, and they're just better than they were.
Yeah, they are, and things could change for the Rockets. You never know, right? They could just hit a massive slump on the offensive end. But yeah, so you have 2 teams that have gone up. I mean, really even 3 with the Spurs. But again, the Spurs have gotten pretty lucky so far. They may trade guys. Like I don't know how sustainable their performance is. And then, the Pels have also fallen off. So the Kings being 12th, but yeah, they are pretty close. I think that low number for making the playoffs is just reflective of the competition. Here's the thing that I think that I like the most about the Kings relative to the competition is just that I think they have a much better chance of staying healthy than some of these teams ahead of them, right? Where like Sabonis never gets hurt. Fox is pretty tough. DeRozan has missed a few games, but he's been very healthy over the course of his career. You could also maybe see the Kings making a trade. Like unlike a team like, say, the Lakers, I think that the Kings, just by adding a couple of competent bench guys, like a backup power forward and like a small forward, if even the slightest pulse, or a backup center, that would shore up some of their weaknesses, and they could look a lot better with like very gettable types of players. Whereas the Lakers, they need like a starting small forward, which is just like not really available.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And they could theoretically, and the Kings have some flexibility. I cracked up with the reporting that the Kings are willing to move Kevin Huerter and Trey Lyles. Well, yes, they are. Those guys are not having fantastic seasons and are some of their more like movable salary. And so there are ways for them to get better, for them to put a higher portion of minutes. And then like, even he hasn't played yet this year and most rookies aren't positive players, but like, I think Devin Carter could potentially help them, even if it's not the biggest spot of need for them. I still just really like Devin Carter. So maybe he can potentially, when he's,
and the odds of him being better than Monk maybe Herter moves in a trade, but being better than Monk or even Keon Ellis as a rookie, trying to get up to speed, having missed 8 months with shoulder surgery, that's tough to ask.
Yeah. And also their bigger needs, as you said, are at those spots. And so they could potentially get people through buyouts, through trades. And Sacramento, they're only about $4 million below the tax right now, but that is a little bit of wiggle in trades. The unfortunate thing for them is that Huerter, if another team likes him, he's still owed a lot of money for next year. So it's not like you can, roll the dice there, maybe get off some bad money or anything like that. And Lyles is making 8. So even if you like Trey Lyles, you don't want to pay him 8.
You want to take this one from Jake?
Yes. What are your thoughts, Ben, and how do the numbers look with Malik Monk in the Kings starting lineup since the change was made? If some of you might remember that I have been a supporter of this, well, I also liked some of what Keon Ellis brought. I thought that having more shooting when you have DeRozan in the mix now, I thought that worked for Malik Monk, especially when Kevin Huerter has not been the player that we hoped he would be. And the numbers have looked pretty good so far. So I don't have the numbers on the split since the transition happened with the starters, but over the full season, when Monk has been the 5th guy with DeRozan, Murray, Sabonis, and Fox, it's 372 clean the glass possessions, and they have a +10 net rating, +9.8 if you want to be specific. That is better than the net rating with Huerter, which is still positive, +7.2. And it's worse than with Keon Ellis, which is ridiculous, plus 24.9, but that's only in 101 possessions. They've really moved away from that this year. And the reason why I really like Monk, he provides some shooting, but he also, if teams devote a lot of their defensive resources to the other players, he is fantastic at attacking insufficient defenders. And so I think that Monk, and he can bring something in transition with this group. So I like him the best of that. There are times that you could go with Ellis just if you need another perimeter defender, but I fully support the change.
iCat Film says, what should be the asking price for Fox? I guess to trade him. I mean, it probably would be one of these like close to a whole draft sort of deals.
Yeah,
he has 1 year left on his deal after this.
But... Yeah, and it's what are the Kings if they move De'Aaron Fox? Like, so if you think about what a trade of De'Aaron Fox is, because you're not trading him for a player who's better than Fox, because what team is going to make that sort of a deal? So instead, most of the trades for league average starters or better are for younger players and picks. And if the Kings trade De'Aaron Fox for younger players and picks, it has to be a ton of those guys because they're going to get significantly worse. And I don't think that's kind of the right course for Sacramento. I think that you've committed enough to this, and like they're not great, but like if you're happy with being in the play-in mix, like you're in the play-in mix. Like if the people who thought they were a top 4 team in the West, like you could have heard me a couple of years ago, I would have told you.
All right, let's just clean up a few of these comments here on YouTube. Richard talking about Lowry looking really bad. His athleticism is gone. Dan wrote about how he basically has the lowest block rate for a 7-footer ever, which is surprising. A couple of years ago, he actually had sneaky decent numbers protecting the rim. And yeah, he's shooting way worse at the rim. That's partially because the team doesn't have as much spacing. He's playing more 3, but yeah, I mean, he definitely, and he also has been missing a bunch of time with this back issue. So I don't think that he is just like turned into a pumpkin permanently, but obviously he hasn't been good this year. Jordan asks me, do I still think a peanut butter and jelly sandwich is a dessert? I guess that's because I'm wearing this ridiculous club sandwich hat that I got in Barcelona. Our whole family went into this hat store and we decided that each of us was going to get a hat that had a food on it. And so I'm club sandwich. I think Ashton was like a fruit. Can't remember what my sister ended up being. But anyway, yeah, it absolutely is 100% a dessert. Like, what ingredient is not a dessert? Like, jelly is incredibly sweet. Any kind of peanut butter that you're having, maybe if you have some like crazy natural peanut butter, that's like a little bit more nutritious, but almost all peanut butter has sugar in it. And then like you're probably having white bread as well. I mean, that's basically the same nutrition as candy. It is not like you could have it as like, quick energy type of thing, but the closest it is in terms of its overall nutritional components is just a dessert.
I don't really have much of a disagreement there. I ate him for lunch a lot as a kid, but it's like that's what it is. If you choose to eat it other times, that's fine. But in terms of what the ingredients are, like jelly is not used in many lunch foods.
Okay, let's we got a few that are on some of the teams we're going to hit coming up here, so let's try to remember to jump back to this in a little bit. But Rod did say Brandon Ingram to the Spurs, and I mean they might be fascinated in him because of his mid-range styling. He basically is like the new DeMar DeRozan in a lot of ways. Like they have some of the most similar games. I think DeRozan's a little bit more effective than him at his best than Ingram is. But yeah, they should just be shooting higher, right? Like
I would hate that.
Yeah.
Because Ingram.
Now, if you could get what if you could just get him for nothing in like free agency or a sign and trade?
You still have to pay him a fair salary. It's not like you're going to get him for $15 million. Like
right. I mean, that might be 35, but the Pels would bring him back. Would just bring him back for that number.
Yeah. So I would not. And Zach LaVine, no, thank you.
Yeah, it's just like okay. Like, do you see either of those guys as the second best player on a championship team? No. Do you have to pay them like such a player? Yes. Like those are guys who are just Like Zach LaVine maybe as a third best guy for a team that's like super expensive, and you can convince yourself that this guy's going to push you over the hump because you already have 2 great stars and you're cool with like being in the second apron for a couple of years. You know, kind of the logic of the Bradley Beal trade didn't work out too well, by the way. Like good because that like Beal, Ingram, LaVine, like these are all guys who are just like probably not an all-star in most years, like 30th best player if you squint hard. And so, yeah, making that guy the number 2 player on your team is just not going to get you there. So better to keep the powder dry. There's no point in making a push over these next couple of years. It's the same logic behind not trading for Trae Young. Like, now, if you feel like you have 2 guys who are on rookie contracts that are already those tentpole guys, and you want to add that third guy just to be better in the interim, that would make a little bit more sense. But I like in Orlando, actually would, someone like Trae Young would have made more sense on someone like Orlando right now.
Yes,
because they already have those 2 guys.
Well, and also Orlando's not going to have a strong pick. Their own pick isn't going to be strong again. So like you're not burning that asset either. San Antonio, I mean, they played more competitively this year, but there's still a chance that they could add a quality player through the draft.
Holy shit, do we have a lot of Blazers questions? And after they had a nice ascent to 7-10, they promptly went 1-8 with the injuries that they suffered. That was all too predictable. And they are negative 9.5 net rating, is 28th in the NBA, 28th on offense, 26th on defense. They still somehow project to get to 30 wins. I'll take the under on that one. And 0% chance of making the playoffs. I would say, Danny, we got a lot of stuff about Scoot, Shaden. Let's just save those till, I mean, we won't specifically answer these questions, but we're going to talk about these guys a lot when we do top 10 prospects in the very near future. So let's save those and see if we can hit on a few of these other ones.
We could start with this one from Derek White. The Blazers center logjam, Klingon, Robert Williams, DeAndre Ayton, who stays, who goes. In an ideal world, I think that Ayton would go, but the problem is you have to find a team that was actually interested in trading for him. Yeah. And
well, that's another one of those. When does this contract end? I guess it's only another year and a half.
Exactly. And so you just kind of have to grin and bear it. I think teams should be more willing to de-emphasize players while still keeping them, because like if you don't think this guy has a future with your organization, then you don't need to coddle him. And so with DeAndre,
well, honestly though, let's keep in mind something. The optics of him, even if his stats aren't that good and the owners don't really care about basketball that much, they can say this guy is like not even playing anymore that you traded for, that you're making us pay $35 million for. Like they're actually like a relatively expensive team.
They are. Only a few million
what
below
they
the
are.
tax. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's one of the weirdest dynamics of the Blazers this year.
I mean, they started off expensive, obviously, with Dame, and they took back matching salary, but then they also brought back Jeremy Grant. Supposedly the asking price is lower now for Jeremy Grant. Yeah, maybe you should have moved him when he had more value. Just a thought. Same thing with Anthony Simons, and maybe they like teams just assume that you can always trade a guy, and like, yeah, you can always trade a guy if he keeps performing. Right? Like OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam, they kept performing. Yes, they had less on their contract, but teams still wanted them. But there's not only the risk of their getting close to the end of their contract and being forced to move, but just that they might not play as well.
Yeah. And
like Jeremy Grant wasn't going to play better than he was playing at this time last year. Okay, so yeah, going back to the center log jam, I mean, I think Ayton, in all likelihood, either his contract expires or he gets bought out or something and goes to a playoff team and actually tries and then gets another contract and completely disappoints that team. Or Rob, really good player, when healthy, suffers so many injury issues. His concussion, I think, is part of why they've struggled so much recently. And obviously Klingon was out too until his miracle recovery. But I mean, I think Ayton just like he is untradeable. Klingon will stick around, so Rob is the guy who's going to get moved.
Yeah.
And hopefully they can get value for him if he stays healthy. And by the way, guys, if you can get value for him, if you anything that even like has, the LaCroix of first rounders, just get it.
Well, and I think another question that we get to, which a long questioner name, is who on the Blazers roster should be a part of their long-term future. And I think that probably starts with Klingon and Sharp. And I think that, how big a part we're going to have to see, but I think that both of them can be players at least they get a lot more rope. Scoot, I think you still give him more time. We're not going into the Scoot questions.
You wouldn't. It's at the point now where you wouldn't think twice about drafting over the top of him.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, but if you get Dylan Harper, you're not gonna be like, oh, we got Scoot Henderson, right? Like you go ahead and make that attempt. But I'm still not totally giving up on Scoot yet.
I absolutely am not.
He's someone. Like one of the casualties of focusing so much on the NBA Cup and our gamers recently has been the fact that the Blazers, some of these really bad teams, I actually haven't, like Toronto's another one that I need to lock in on a little bit more in the coming days, because we're doing it East 15 and 60, so maybe I'll try to answer some more of these questions a little bit for that. But I have like some of the bad teams that weren't involved in the NBA Cup, I've kind of like feel like I've lost track of them a little bit. But obviously the numbers are bad overall. Like they're like Scoot, at least the one thing that's given me, because I guess we won't talk about him that much tomorrow, sadly, is like I've at least seen flashes. They have been minimal. The shooting has remained awful, but I've at least seen him like blow by guys. I've at least seen him like play a few couple minute stretches that look pretty good. I think actually his distribution has been totally good. Like I feel decent about that. And I think like defensively, he's a young player. He's not like some great shakes, but he certainly physically and like intensity wise, I think he can be totally good there. Just got to make the ball go in the basket.
Yep. Let's see.
Oh, this is one from Jim. Given the Blazers' long rebuild timeline, would it be worth taking a shot on Zion for Jeremy Grant?
As the Blazers, 1,000%. Because not only is Zion's contract like weirdly not that guaranteed, but Jeremy Grant's contract could turn into a pumpkin that is guaranteed. And so if it takes,
I don't know why the Pels would do that though. Supposedly they're not thinking about cutting him or trading him, but that's going to be one of those ones where they're going to insist that up until the very moment it happens.
Right. But so because Jeremy Grant, like he's a talented player who could help out a better team more than he can help out the Blazers. But I mean, he's getting older, and you always wonder where things are going to go. I think he turned 30 this year, and so yeah, if you can get off of it a little bit early, and I mean to do that and get a player like Zion Williamson, who at least has the possibility of being great and doing, like being the offensive player who makes Shaedon Sharp's life easier and some of these other guys, like, yeah, of course you do that. And they have Klingon, who could potentially be a defensive anchor that Zion really hasn't played with very much in his career. So of course you would do that. But like, to me, this is such an outlier possibility. Like there are far trickier Jeremy Grant trades than one for a player. I even if he's flawed, that I still understand the value.
Yeah, Jeremy Grant, just so for those of y'all who don't know, is shooting 40.5% from 2 this season.
Oh,
and he's not even like, he's not taking, I mean, I think he still tries to go 1-on-1 and take some of his jumpers the way he did before. So I think it's probably time for him to transition into more of a 3-and-D type of role. But last year, when he actually was efficient, would have been the time to do that. Now it's kind of like, all right, he's moving into more of this like Dorian Finney-Smith kind of phase of his career where he's making shots, but from 3, but he doesn't really do much else on offense at this point. And yeah, he's a guy. He's not, I won't say he's dependent on athleticism, because Jeremy Grant is one of the greatest shooting improvements that any player has ever had in their career. If you saw what his jump shot looked like those first couple of Philly years, and like, as someone who listened to Derek Bodner's podcast at the time, I was very locked in on that. So that's not to like diminish what he's become, but certainly there are he really needs to be kind of back in more of that role that he was in Denver. The question then becomes of just at age 30, having been a pseudo star, can he get back to, is he going to be Mikal Bridges' eyes where he can't really get back to, and not to say that Bridges for sure won't do that, but so far he hasn't, like, get back to this more plebeian role. All right, anything else here that we can get to? If you could see a player from the Blazers traded to another team, so all parties are in a reasonably better position, who would you want to wear and for what? I mean, certainly, and with the Lakers part with one of their unprotected firsts, plus like Rui Hachimura and Gabe Vincent for Grant at this point, would that make all parties better off?
It would make the Lakers better off. I think it would.
I mean, that's like, as the Lakers, are you like? I think like LeBron has got to show me a little bit more before I make that deal as the Lakers.
It does complicate their books, to be abundantly clear.
Well, and also just like, all right, we're going to give up an unprotected pick in 29. Now, could you do it top 4 protected like you did the pick that is owed to Utah? Maybe.
I think Portland would take that. They're not going to do better.
Has any Portland young guy improved under Chauncey? And you'd have to say Simons.
Yeah, I mean, Simons, I would say Tamani Kamara probably has. I mean,
although he's shooting better this year. I mean, Tamani Kamara is 5.1 per 36 on threes, 37%. Like, that's actually like totally respectable for a 4. And Sharp has gotten somewhat better. Sharp struggling to shoot the ball a little bit these days, but he's gotten a lot better from 2. Yeah, I mean, whenever John and I do our coach rankings, if Chauncey Billups is still around, he will be a bottom 5 coach, probably a bottom 3 coach again. Due to the improvement in the coaching profession, like, I don't think Chauncey Billups like sucks, but they should have moved on from him a while ago.
Well, and
he's just not the answer.
I brought this up when we did the big takeaways of the year, but it was that, a lot of these first year coaches are doing a good job so far. And so the idea was that maybe some teams would regret that. I brought up the Pelicans as one, but the Blazers are another team that, if they could have gotten somebody from this group, maybe they would have worked out.
All right, then let's see if we got any more in terms of some questions here. Yeah, Tats says Brandon Roy and Greg Oden trauma relived if trading for Zion. Well, the thing is that they weren't guys who were deemed to be the homegrown futures of the franchise whose careers were ruined by injuries in Portland. It would just be a flyer, So hopefully you're not as emotionally wrapped up in it.
No. So let's get to the Phoenix Suns.
Yeah.
The Suns are 14-11 on the year, 5-4 since the last 15-60. They still have a negative net rating, negative 0.6 is 16th in the league, 10th on offense, 22nd on defense, and BPI projects them to win 44 games, which would be the 7th seed. And we get started with this one from Ledyard NBA NFL Draft. It's a long shot, but since there's been the reporting about Jimmy Butler's interest in Phoenix, do you think current Jimmy Butler is a better fit for the Suns than current Bradley Beal? And my answer is yes.
Oh, yeah, 1,000%.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very, very difficult trade to work mechanically because of where these teams are. But if the question is, would Jimmy Butler do more to help the Suns than Bradley Beal is, the answer is yes.
Well, yeah, and obviously, like, the Suns can only trade away one person at a time. They can't aggregate. So that would have to be Beal, Booker, or KD, the latter of which are not going anywhere. I mean, Butler is just way better than Beal. They don't have a 3. KD plays the 4, but he shoots like whatever position you want to call him. He's amazing there. And Booker is also a really good shooter. that if you've got Jimmy, then you could also just play Booker at the 2, which would be nice. Like, part of it isn't even that Butler fits so well, although I think he does better. He fits better on Phoenix than on the Heat, for example, but just offensively. But then also you get rid of this issue that you're playing a point guard and 2 shooting guards in the starting lineup. Now you can actually just start Tyus Jones and just having a little more toughness with Jimmy, KD, and Nurkic is actually like a pretty, and Booker is like a pretty big too. Like, you actually have like pretty good size as a team now. Butler can also kind of solve your problem at backup 4 if you need it. And they need like more guys who can, like, Butler can't really guard the ball anymore, but he still is better than most of the guys that they have. And he just would be an amazing off ball defender. He would also just give them more overall intensity, which I think they need to. So, no, I think he would be a great fit. If the Suns, I would give up. Now, of course, Briel would have to waive his no trade.
But I think he would.
But if I were the Suns, I would give up anything that wasn't tied down to get Jimmy Butler for Bradley Beal.
I would too. And the fundamental question that I get to is that enough to get the Heat to pay a player for significantly longer? Because I would, as the Heat, be far more interested in just letting Jimmy Butler walk and deal with the ramifications of that for everything than commit to paying Bradley Beal over $50 million for another 2 seasons after this one.
Again, a lot of trade questions, and my next task is going to be to really go through and list out every single trade candidate, which I do around this time. Every year I'm a little bit slow on that due to the cup this year, but so that'll put me in a little bit better position to answer this question. But a lot of questions about, like, can the Suns do anything? Second apron, are we overall likely to see fewer trades? I'm not sure about fewer trades because their teams are more desperate than they've ever been. The problem for the Suns is, like, who is the guy who fits in their salary band that would be acquirable for one of the main things that they have to trade, which would be a 2031 unprotected first. And, then maybe, and then also who just, when I say fits in their salary band, all they can do is trade one guy and take back less. So the guys they could trade would be Nurkic, actually playing pretty well again, making $18 million. So you could take back $18 million or less in a trade. Grayson Allen making 15. Royce O'Neal, 9, Josh Okogie, 8. Probably the sort of deal you would do. I think the sort of guys that are going to be popular are, sort of like starter minus guys on rookie scale deals who don't necessarily fit on a winning team. Like, this isn't a guy who would change Phoenix's fortune. I wouldn't recommend they go after him. But, sorry, don't necessarily, let me restate that. Guys who don't really fit on a losing team because they're kind of role players, right? Like Day'Ron Sharpe, who cares about keeping him around if you're the Nets? You have Nick Claxton already. It doesn't sound like they're necessarily going to try to move him, although I'll believe that when I see it. They managed to move Schroeder, and Cam Thomas is hurt, so that'll probably take care of their tanking ambitions for now. But that's sort of a player, a guy who's like, all right, kind of a starter. I mean, Isaiah Stewart, if Detroit is a little bit worse, I think they want to hold on to him, and he's also not on a rookie deal anymore. But the idea being that if you're the Bucks, you're the Suns, you can acquire that guy, the Sixers, by trading, say, Kenyon Martin or Josh Okogie if you're the Suns, and save a little bit of money. You give up the first, but also get a player who's going to at least be in your rotation. So I got to really go through and make a list of who those guys potentially might be. Think PJ Washington before he became a restricted free agent and signed his new contract. That type of guy.
Raw says the Suns need Jakob Poeltl. A, I don't think they do. B, Jakob Poeltl makes more money than Yusuf Nurkic, so they can't acquire him.
Yeah. I think for what the Suns need, I actually think Nurkic is better than Poeltl.
So do I.
Nurkic is way better defensively than Poeltl. Now, maybe Bud could help Poeltl get a resuscitation defensively, the way he has for both. I mean, Nurkic was actually quietly very good last year also. Frank Vogel, also a pretty decent defensive coach. But obviously, Brook Lopez is the big feather in Bud's cap. Suns are 13-2 with KD, 1-9 without. Should the Suns be concerned about a future with Booker as a number one option? Yeah, he's been disappointing this year. I'm not sure why exactly that is. He just hasn't seemed to quite have the level of juice to beat guys one-on-one. We thought maybe that bringing in a point guard could enable him to play off the ball just a little bit more, do some more off-ball screening stuff the way they did for him in the CP era. But he just, like, as I watch him, he just hasn't really been beating his man as much. He's had some big games, but I think he's had trouble getting a little separation in the mid-range. And, maybe it's just kind of nagging injury type of stuff. Maybe it's just missing shots. But do you agree with me, Danny, that he just hasn't quite looked as unstoppable as an individual scorer?
I absolutely agree. I think that he hasn't been as dominant this year. And I mean, you and I were kind of talking about him in the periphery of the top 10 player stuff at times last year, and he wouldn't be there for me right now. And yes, the lift at times has been harder because Kevin Durant's been unavailable, but we hoped that he could do that lift, and he hasn't so far. So yeah, it has been a pretty disappointing year so far, where there's a lot more year to be played, but we're, 25 games in, and this isn't what I wanted to see.
Yeah, I'm gonna take a look at some numbers on Devin Booker, where, yeah, I mean, he just hasn't been that devastating as a pick and roll player or an isolation player. He's basically been, particularly isolation, 58th percentile, 0.93 points per possession. That's not something that's, and yes, does it help to have KD out there? So a lot of times he's getting the second best defender instead of the best. If you put a lot of length on Booker, it could be a problem. But also, like, he used to be able to use the screen and get himself open if you put a bigger guy on him. So yeah, he hasn't been quite as dynamic. And then going back to last year, if you take a look at some of the numbers, I'm just seeing if anything pops out to me. Yeah, in isolation last year, particularly in pick and roll last year, is where he was absolutely deadly. In the 92nd percentile per synergy. And so he just, like, he's still effective, but it just hasn't been quite as ridiculous as it was before. And I think just he hasn't been able to get as many easy shots as he got before either. Not playing as much in transition as he did a year ago, and hasn't been shooting as well in transition. I think I would say this too, Danny. I think he's been hurt some by the straight line pathway interpretation.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
He, like, one of his favorite moves was get the ball on the right wing without a big back, accelerate and kind of feel the contact and throw it up and maybe get a foul call, or at least if they're in the bonus to get to the foul line. Like, is his free throw rate way down this year? I should have looked at this beforehand, but I'm guessing, because he used to actually get to the line a fair amount and get a lot of those in transition too.
Not as down as you'd think. So, no. 7 per 36 is about what he's been in the better years recently. His career high is 7.3.
Yeah. Also shooting 35% from three, which is not great, and shooting at the rim pretty poor. 60% shooting at the rim for Devin Booker. Last year, that was 76%. So that's actually your biggest decline out of anything. Mm-hmm. That's interesting. And yeah, so 55% from two last year, 50 this year, and that's basically all decline at the rim. Like, his jump shooting is actually not that much worse. And other thing is he's taken way more threes this year, but taking fewer shots at the rim and making a lot fewer of them. So yeah, I mean that still kind of shows that he's just, the athleticism hasn't been there as much to me. Is Beal done? I didn't expect him to be averaging 25 with high true shooting, but 17.3 is pathetic for someone who's paid $50 million. He's someone where, like, there's been flashes to me athletically where it looked pretty good. He's taking on more of a defensive role, which I think has been better than some people would have expected. But he just keeps having these false starts with the injuries. It's the calf. Now it's the knee soreness. It was the back. Like, I think he just, like, there are moments he can do it if all these nagging injuries on a given night are feeling good. but obviously they could have used him, but he's missing like half of these games that KD is out too.
Right.
You would, and then I think I would also say they haven't used him quite enough when he has had the advantage. Like there have been games where he's playing really well and being really efficient, and he just literally doesn't touch the ball. And like there was one game even when Booker was out, I think, where he didn't touch the ball until he's.
Yeah,
I can't remember what game
I was
that was
watching
maybe the LA game. Did that,
I
that go into overtime?
I think it was the I think it was the LA game.
Yeah. All right, let's see. Anything else that we can hit on? Do you think the book says this? He had a lot of good questions. Thanks, books. Do you think Tyus Jones, the experience to increase his value as a starter on a team, is working thus far? No, probably not. He's just the exact same guy that he was. Now, is the Wizards being like, which people probably thought it was impossible, being so much worse without him is probably at least somewhat telling. But no, it's either if he's going to play on a good team, maybe he gets brought in on a sub $10 million a year contract, or he can go to a bad team on a 2-year, $11 million a season deal or something like that. Like there just isn't. Yes, he is a top 30 point guard in basketball probably, but there just isn't that much demand to bring in a guy like that as a starter because these bad teams probably have like a young player they're developing that position or something along those lines, like the Wizards, as it turned out with Bub Carrington. Like they don't really need Tyus Jones, and then the good teams don't want to bring him in for a huge role at big money.
Right, and so you operate in this weird space where you arguably are starter quality, but you're not a starter for anyone. And so getting paid in that position is really hard. And sometimes the team will make a mistake, but usually they don't.
This is a good one.
Yeah, from Andrea, is there a realistic move that the Suns can make to become even fringe contenders? Depending on how you define fringe, no. I think that there are too many good teams, and could they make a conference finals if they get a favorable bracket? Sure, but would I expect them to win the title? I don't think they're a complete enough team at this juncture. There are too many other ones. So maybe you could get to the outside of the second tier and get a little bit lucky, but I don't consider that a fringe contender.
If their stars just actually played the way they're supposed to play, I think they would be a contender.
Okay.
Like KD has given them everything that you could have realistically hoped for this year, and their numbers with him in the lineup are lucky. But like if Booker and Beal actually like played the way they're supposed to play, like I actually think they have a good enough supporting cast around these guys.
If
like who? All right, they're not going to beat OKC. Right, like that. So fringe contender, make the conference finals. Like, I don't think there's anybody else in the West that I'm like terrified of. If KD and Booker just like actually played the way they've played at their best at times in the last 3 years, and Beal was just 90% of the guy they hoped they were getting.
Denver has their flaws. I'd still pick them in a series over.
Well, I would pick them too. I don't know. I still want to see what this Denver team is over the longer. Like if Jamal Murray is not like anywhere close to being an all-star, but a lot of these teams have guys who just haven't quite performed at the level that you would expect. Luka has turned it around, and now the Mavs are looking ridiculous. They're probably looking like the number 2 team in the West right now. But yeah, who behind that really scares you if you're Phoenix? I'm not. I mean, they could make the second round even with all these guys playing the same way, as long as KD doesn't sprain his ankle like 87 times the rest of the season.
Yeah, I would still.
I know you're not enthused, but but okay. So a realistic move. So trading Beal is not a realistic move. Could you get a reasonable 3 who could move him to the bench for like Grayson Allen? Like, I don't think trading for Finney Smith, like Grayson Allen for Finney Smith, I don't think that gets you there. Yeah. All right, you want to do one more team here?
Yes, let's do.
Yeah, we don't have to spend too much time on these guys because we've spent a shitload of time on them recently. But
we're about to spend more on them in less than 24 hours.
And we got one in the comment here in the comments then.
Yeah, too. Which is actually pretty similar to a question that we have. So the Oklahoma City Thunder are 20-5 and a strong 8-1 since the last 1560. Reminder that all NBA Cup games to this point count, but the championship game does not. The Thunder lead the NBA in net rating, plus 12.3 per 100 possessions. 8th on offense, still first on defense, projected to win 60, which would be the best record in the West. And so basically we got a question from Spain PNR, and then we got a question from Red Fork Layer, which I think are somewhat along the same line. But Spain PNR is like talking about OKC versus the field. But I think the more interesting question is kind of the Red Fork one, which is what are they like on defense? And so I'm sad that we're not going to get to see as much of the regular season as the laboratory, maybe not any, for Daignault in terms of how this is going to work. But my preference, knowing what we know right now, would be that Holmgren and Hartenstein together is a button you can press, but not one that you're pressing all the time. As great as those two players are, that part of the luxury that the Thunder have is that you can go to that, but it isn't required to start or close any important game.
The analog that I can point to, and this has been something that has been gone to a lot more recently, was that 2019 Toronto team, where all of a sudden they ran up in this matchup with this Sixers team that just was so big and caused them so many problems that Nick Nurse decided he was just going to start Ibaka and Marc Gasol together in that series. And that adjustment was actually a very underrated adjustment, is one of like the best in-series adjustments that I can remember. Like actually going big. Usually the adjustment is go small. And so just having the ability to do that, and particularly to deal with Jokic as well, I think is huge. It all just comes down to the other end. Like it would be better on defense. Like generally have the more size you have on defense, even I think there was a feeling for a long time like, oh yeah, like you can't play these centers because they'll just get spaced out. Well, if they're not going against the Golden State Warriors, it's more important to just like with prime Steph Curry, it's more important to just have more rim protection, particularly given that Chet has a lot of mobility. The other three guys they have out there will be able to fly around. It's just a question of whether Chet can shoot it well enough. Like I'm not sure. I guess that Chet also could actually be in the dunker spot too, right? Like you could see Hartenstein and all like it actually, maybe it is. The more I think about it, actually, maybe it is viable because Shea, he's money on the mid-ranger.
He's not trying to get all the way.
So you try to play a drop. You set the screen with Hartenstein. You try to play a drop. Shea just bangs that elbow jumper on you. And you like that's especially considering how good OKC is defensively on the other side. That shot can beat you because you just won't be able to score on Holmgren and Hartenstein. But then you put two on the ball on Shea. Now it's Hartenstein in the short roll. He throws it up and Chet can dunk it out of the dunker spot. So because you have Shea, maybe it can be viable. Maybe it's not just, all right, we're going to play Chet as our 4 and space him out all the time. And Chet also making corner threes would be a lot different too. You might be able to start killing him on the offensive glass as well. Actually, the more I think about it, I think it could be viable. That also might be a pathway to play a little bit more of Isaiah Joe.
Sure.
As well, if you wanted to in some lineup. So it's a shame that Mark Daignault probably isn't going to have enough time to really explore that until they need it. But yeah, going up against a Minnesota or a Denver, yeah. But I mean, the only reason not to do it, I would say, isn't that it's not going to work. It's just that their perimeter talent is so good, and you want to just have a center on the floor at all times and stagger them, that it's not that it won't work. It's just that other things might work even better than that would work.
Right. And so you have it in your back pocket. And when I was saying it's not a requirement, like you could still go to it when it's the right move. And I think that there are absolutely some circumstances. I want to answer this question super fast. Would you rather have OKC's future outlook or the Spurs? The Thunder by 1,000 miles. And that's with loving Victor Wembanyama. The Thunder are a fantastic team right now. They don't need anything else to be contender for the next 5 years.
I mean, the question is, and Victor Wembanyama is a historic player, and maybe like the Spurs are even in the top 20 of this question. But the question is, what teams ever would you want to have over the Thunder outlook at like this stage of their team's development? Which is this is year 2 of them being like a real threat. this is year. I mean, even the previous year was actually supposed to be another tanking year, and they were just too good, and they made it into the play-in. Like, this is really like year 2 of them even trying. Like, who like, to going back to like, okay, like the '80s Celtics, the '80s Lakers were different because that was Magic joining
the 14-15 Warriors, because of the cap space situation, and they ended up
and they didn't even have all their picks. They were actually out 2 picks going forward. But even they, like, Iguodala was old. Like, everyone on the team other than Caruso is young, like 26 or under. It's unbelievable. Ludicrous. I mean, obviously, the first OKC team is in that conversation.
But probably, these guys aren't better, like, at top level talent, but they fit together better than that team did.
Yeah, and so, early '80s Celtics has got to be on that list, certainly. I mean, going back to like the '60s Celtics. Once you get built, but that was a different time. Like, you didn't have
when Red Auerbach could just get every other team, get every other exec drunk and just take all their best players. Yeah, they were better.
Yeah, I mean, having Jordan, Pippen, and Grant was a pretty damn good, but like that wasn't a group that like they didn't really have any other prospects of note other than those 3 guys that kind of just supplemented with.
Maz says the 18 Celtics, and I would rather have this Thunder Foundation than the 18 Celtics.
Yeah, Shea's way better than anyone on that team, I would say. He's way better than anyone on that team ever became, I would say right now. But yeah, maybe he's not way better than Tatum, but he definitely is better to me. And now, yeah, the 18 Celtics, like a lot of those picks that they had didn't really become anything. Like they had that Grizzlies pick, I think that ended up being 14. The Lakings pick ended up being 14. Like their stuff looked a lot better at the time, but they also had Kyrie Irving. They had Hayward coming back that year, I guess. So yeah, but they didn't have cap space except that Al Horford left, and then they were able to get Kemba Walker. Like but they wouldn't have got that if Kyrie had left. So, yeah, Maz has some stuff in the. Oh yeah, Red Fork 95 Magic. I mean, that's definitely up there. We forget about that team because Shaq left, but even that, they didn't really have much in the way of like picks in the future or cap space. They got Horace Grant with cap space, but it was basically Penny. Like the only real premium players they had, like Dennis Scott was kind of like, he shot threes, but he's kind of fat. Like couldn't really defend. They didn't have like a great shooting guard. It's basically like Penny, Shaq, and Horace Grant on that team. And I guess Nick Anderson. Nick Anderson was actually a really good player before he ruined his own career by missing those free throws in Game 1 of the 95 finals. But anyway, this OKC team is like a top 5 team ever, and in terms of like how good they are with also the future assets that they have, they're probably either number 1 or number 2 with that Celtics team from the last decade.
And if they were in a place where I had the confidence that their owner would spend what it requires to keep this group together, and maybe they will. But if I was 100% confident in that, I would be even better. I try not to factor that in as much. It's more in the abstract, but it's incredible.
Well, the other thing too, like for the guy said, early 2010s Golden State, we didn't know that Klay Thompson and Draymond Green, right.
We're trying not to use those guys until they became them. Here. We're trying to be at the time.
Yeah, at the time, right? Yeah, I mean, obviously in hindsight, sure, that you had like 3 there's nobody's thinking of Klay Thompson other than Jerry West, to his credit, thankfully. But I certainly wasn't. I said they should trade him for Kevin Love at the time.
So did I.
But yeah, and then they had Harrison Barnes was looking like an okay starter. But, there was, I mean, like that team came absolutely out of nowhere. And we didn't know how good until that team actually won 67 games, like no one even thought that, other than Ethan Strauss, nobody thought they were even a remote championship threat or that they even would be. Like nobody understood how good Steph Curry, even in 14, nobody understood that Steph Curry was already a top 5 player that year. Like, I don't think, like, I thought myself like very prescient to rank him like number 5 in the league in 2014. And then he becomes the MVP the next year. Okay, that took us, that's the beauty of this format, though. We can kind of just go down whatever rabbit hole we want to.
Yeah. We could do this one from most you dig. Which West team, as is, do you think is best suited to challenging the Thunder in a 7-game series?
I'd try to be the Dallas Mavericks, right?
I think so. I mean, Denver has Jokic, and if we can kind of put Jamal Murray not to the level he was in their championship year, but to like a happy medium between those two, they're a bear. But I do think it's Dallas.
Would you rather have Lou Dort or Dylan Brooks? I will take Lou Dort, please.
Absolutely.
Both of them have been relatively durable of late. Brooks had some injury issues early. Little more of a believer in Lou Dort shooting. I think he's harder to play against even than Brooks. Brooks, I might like guarding like kind of 4s more, actually. Right? If you had to say who do you want guarding Victor Wembanyama, Dylan Brooks, or Dort, I probably would go Brooks in that. But also Dort is just probably plays even harder than Dylan Brooks. I think he's better as a team defender and like charge taker and stuff. Like, he gets a bunch of these offensive fouls off the ball. He doesn't get into foul trouble as much as Brooks, I would say, either. And yeah, Brooks, is probably a little better inside the arc player, but not by much on the offensive end. So yeah, probably go Dort.
I would too.
And Ben says, I don't see OKC making major deals. They're adding the fringes. Are there any guys you'd like to see them add? Dorian Finney-Smith or similar significance to a player? No. The only guy I think they should go after is someone who's a really good shooter who can defend, or another like real premium offensive player. But even then, you're hurting your defensive identity to some degree. But they have some of these mid-level contracts like Joe Wiggins. They have a lot of assets going forward. I wouldn't go after, say, a Jeremy Grant type at this point, even what Jeremy Grant was thought to be last year. But yeah, I mean, I think I just don't know who's available that is should they go after like a Simons type, like, and just have him be an expensive luxury coming off the bench and not closing sometimes, just because they need one more on-ball guy. I do still think that. I think they're going to be like fiending for Shea to come back in the game in the playoffs because they just won't be able to score. So I think their defense has been even better than I thought it would be, and I thought it would be unbelievable. It's been that and then some. And so you don't want to take away from that, but I also just think they need to find, maybe it is getting like a Colin Sexton type of guy. You trade Wiggins and Joe for Colin Sexton. Like that might, maybe is that enough to just get you through 15 minutes a game, playing with Shea a little bit too when Jalen Williams is off the floor. So maybe that's the type of guy they go after, because I mean, I would love for them to get another like true on-ball star. I don't know if that player is available even when they're willing to push in all their chips.
Well, especially because a lot of the teams that have those guys, like I've thought about Jaylen Brown's fit on the Thunder a few times, but you know who's not trading Jaylen Brown? The Boston Celtics aren't trading Jaylen
Brown. Okay, let's see here. Let's just do New Orleans quickly. I don't think there's that much interest.
Yeah, I actually have a first question here, so you can do their stats and I'll do the question.
Okay. 5-22, 1-9 since we last checked in on them, and they actually have been like semi-healthy recently. Like that, they didn't get semi-healthy until maybe halfway through this period of time. But that's still pretty ugly. Their negative 12.9 net rating is 29th. 29th on offense and 28th on defense. All the reporting about it has indicated that Willie Green is not necessarily in trouble. They project for 27 wins, which would be the 14th seed in the West. Which one do you want to start with here?
So the question I want to start with is from Benjamin Lee. Is this disastrous Pelican season sneakily the best thing for them? And my answer is yes. as somebody who wasn't a believer in like the fit and thought that they had to do something bold, this is the impetus, hopefully, for something like that. And it, whether that's...
but isn't something bold just ending this era?
Sure. But
so you felt before this season that they needed to just end this era and completely start over?
I mean, I thought that the Zion Ingram fit wasn't good enough to carry them, that you needed that, like, Herb Jones and Trey and all that type of stuff. And I mean, moving CJ, it seemed like, I think they were lulled into like the enticement of like being kind of good and kind of young, and they were kind of too expensive to make that work. So yeah, I've been saying the Pelicans, like, that they have a bunch of good players who'd be better on other teams. The other team I said that about, the Toronto Raptors, then those guys have been better on other teams. And I would say the Raptors they're in a pretty good place right now when you think about their draft.
I mean, I thought this team had more proof of concept than the Raptors did.
It did.
Like, if they hadn't just lost that last game to the Lakers, they would have been a top 6 seed. Like, they just traded for DeJounte Murray. Obviously, that's looking like a total disaster. Letting Najee Marshall go also is a problem. Like, they're denuding their wing depth, which was one of their big strengths, has been a huge problem. Then they couldn't withstand any injuries. But no, this hasn't been a good thing for the team, because it's proven that just Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson just aren't that good. Like, it's not even necessarily the fit. It's just the players aren't even any good, or they're just even more hurt again.
But I think maybe what I'm seeing is a silver lining. But if you thought that those players were better than I believe they are, then sure. I mean, that's
I mean, watching Zion Williamson go for 40 points in the playing game against the Lakers,
sure,
and then run out of gas, but then you heard all the right things about him. He's coming in great shape. Maybe he would be able to build on last season, and obviously that wasn't the case. He wasn't looking good even at the beginning of the season when he played the 6 games. Now it's the hamstring again. So no, it is not a good thing for the Pels that they, like, Zion Williamson now officially is someone that you basically are never counting on ever again. No, that is not a good thing for the franchise. That the guy who is one of the top 20 prospects that we've ever talked about coming into the draft. But
here's the point. If you were gonna find that out 2 years from now, and when you already had kind of committed to it, but
they could have won like 50 games this year, maybe, if everything had worked out. I mean, obviously, I think there's something a little more rotten to be this bad, even with the injuries. And
that's kind of what I'm getting at, is the idea. So it's not. It's whether this illuminated. If you're believing that this illuminated something that was already there, rather than that this is something new. And that's a fundamental distance. And to me, like, yeah, if you're going to say, oh, well, we thought all these players, all this situation was better than it was, but that's kind of a different answer. That then it's like, well, yeah, I wish Zion was better. I wish this season went well. But if you're going to get all the pain out in 1 year, I'd rather get it out in 1 year than in 3, personally.
Yeah, it would have been nice to get it out before you decided to trade for DeJounte Murray and give up future assets for him. Which I liked at the time, I'll admit.
I still think if they wanted to, there were other teams that were interested in DeJounte Murray at the time. Like, if they really wanted to move on from him, I don't think that the return would be that different than what they give up.
Well, Dyson Daniels looks a lot better now than he did at that point.
Yeah.
Okay, with Stein and Fisher reporting the Pels are listening on Zion, Ingram, CJ, Murray, what's your take on each's value, plus, minus, or neutral? Ingram is a positive value. Yeah, especially on an expiring contract. Like, yeah, you're going to get something. If you just traded him for an expiring, you would get something for him. Like, it would be positive. I don't know that it'd be much. I don't predict he's going to get moved, just because, like, there isn't going to be, like, a big enough offer that would be worth more to this team than his bird rights. I mean, I think they're just going to try to flush this season, get a high draft pick, and then integrate that player into the remains of this group. They have a lot of good players still.
They do.
If they add Dylan Harper to this group, or I mean, Cooper Flagg would be someone like that, and they're just like, yeah, well, we can actually, like, this could be a 1 year pause and we could hit the accelerator again. That wouldn't be crazy. CJ's negative, obviously.
Yeah, so I would say Zion, Ingram, DeJounte are all positive. Now, they're not as positive as the Pelicans would
Yeah.
like, but they're all positive.
Tell me
CJ's
what's
playing.
coming back. I don't. Yeah, I mean Zion just because of the non-guarantee aspect. I guess so.
Yeah, I mean,
but when you can't, you might say that, but then you also say who is trading for him and sending back we just talked about the idea of like Grant for Zion. Like, okay, I guess Jeremy Grant maybe still has like quote unquote positive trade value. Who would give up like the Kings?
Charlotte.
Like, I think it would be one of these teams that's sort of in a similar place as New Orleans, where they're like, all right, yeah, we're not really going anywhere. Let's just see if Zion could bump us up a little bit.
I mean, for me, the most obvious team like that is Charlotte, where Charlotte they don't have they need another tentpole, and they don't have a ton of flexibility. And if you can get it, if you can roll a roll of the dice is better if they don't have to give any of their principles, and I don't think they would have to.
What about one of these old teams, like Lakers or Warriors for Zion? Lakers probably don't have the goods.
So the problem with any big Warriors trade, and this presumably will come in when we get to their questions, is all of their big deals require moving either Wiggins or Green, and that's losing Andrew Wiggins to get Zion Williamson is very hard to take.
I mean, would you trade Draymond?
Oh boy.
They are not. I mean, I like Draymond and Zion could maybe play together. Zion probably needs to play next to a center. They don't really have like a stretch option.
I mean, I don't know
like the Warriors. Zion doesn't make that much. The Warriors could put it together. I think
Zion makes 36.7. It's pretty
so
hard.
Schroeder.
Because remember, they can't add basically a single dollar more than they send out.
Yeah, so do the Pels have like minimums that they could send back to equalize it out? So like Schroeder, Peyton, Heald, Anderson, Looney, they could get there.
Yeah, if they did all of those guys, I guess you could potentially.
Yeah, so the Pels would just, and the Warriors actually have an open roster spot too. That doesn't help much. The Pels would have to. The Pels have an open roster spot. They would need the third team probably needs to get involved.
So if you could do four of
the Pels have DeJounte. The Pels have Javonte Green and Daniel Tice and Matkovic. Matkovic actually wouldn't fit into a minimum exception. So, but so you could do a 4 for 3 pretty easily. Yeah, they could do it and not have to give up Draymond or Wiggins. I think they could. I haven't I'm just eyeballing it right now.
So Nate, sure. I have one other team for you, and I'm not advocating for this team to do it. But the San Antonio Spurs.
Just because you can dump him if you need to.
Yeah, and because like he's an extremely talented player, and you can roll those dice. He's relatively similar in age. It's and if you could do it with a pretty marginal asset cost, whether we're talking players and picks, like. And San Antonio, like they have the matching salary, like they have the wiggle room under the tax, so they could actually save the Pels money in that deal too, which I'm sure New Orleans would love.
Okay. Any of these other? Is Herb Jones or Trey Murphy more valuable for the Pelicans? Oh, that's a good. For the Pelicans, Herb Jones. I think that's right, because they just, especially since they traded away their other two good perimeter defenders, they just don't have anyone else right now, and that includes Trey Murphy, who's only
Trey Murphy could surpass him in time, but Herb Jones for right now.
Yeah, I think so, and for maybe league wide Trey, I mean Trey's getting paid more. Maybe league wide Trey would have more. Also, there's just this weird thing where the Pels still have CJ McCollum, and CJ McCollum has to start because he's CJ McCollum. So that reduces Trey's. But I think that's actually like Willie Green I don't love him as a coach in a lot of ways, but he is answering this question the same way I would, which is, yeah, he's starting Herb instead of Trey Murphy. If Trey Murphy were more valuable, he'd be starting Trey Murphy to the Pels. Did we talk about the Grizzlies? No, we are going to get to everyone else because it's been about an hour and 45 already here. We'll talk about everyone else on Thursday. Tomorrow, we're going to have a very special, if all goes according to plan, crossover with Hollinger and Duncan and Dunc'd. And then, of course, we'll be doing the NBA Cup tomorrow night as well. Join us there on playback or on YouTube for the simulcast. Hope you guys like that. We certainly love doing those. Those are a lot of fun. And yeah, and then we'll wrap everything up on Dunc'd on Prime, where I hope you will subscribe. And I definitely hope that y'all, if you haven't done it yet, will subscribe. It's in the show notes here coming up on the public pod. Just subscribe to our free newsletter. You get Dan's writing twice a week. His daily dunks are awesome. Some of the best daily writing that's out there. Just keeping up on the main stories around the league and breaking it down from a cap perspective, doing a lot of statistical research. He's actually the one that found first that 75 combined missed threes was an NBA record. And so that was that's the sort of stuff that you're going to see in the daily dunks just when you see something like that in a game the night before. All right. I have run out of things to say to promote us. I'm much worse at that than I am doing the actual show. Please forgive me, but we will talk to y'all tomorrow.